So in this session, we are going to start with the Power BI interview questions. One of the important questions that we want to start today is the connectivity modes in Power BI. So how many connectivity modes are there in Power BI? So mainly there are three types of connectivity mode. Okay, the first one is the import mode, the second one would be the direct query mode, and the third one is live connection mode. Let's get into one by one. Before we even get into the discussion, I want to clarify one thing. See, whenever if you are appearing for any kind of an interview, it is not mandatory that you have to provide textual answers. It is not at all. I don't think it's important, right? Ultimately, what really matters is that do you know those things? Are you, if you have worked on a technology, I mean, let's say if you have worked on the Power BI, you should be able to explain the things in your way. Obviously you should be able to communicate properly, that's an important thing, but it does not mean that you provide textual definition. So let's be sure, okay, don't get don't get in, don't get into do not get into the trap wherein you are pushing yourself for the textual answers. Be real in your answers, try and be real, okay. Anyhow, let's get started. So the first connectivity mode for importing the data is import mode. Now how does the import mode works? I think all of us know it, right? How does the import mode works? What do we do? Let's say if you are using a Power BI, like we have seen, so I mean we have seen, if you have seen my previous sessions, what do we do? We import the Excel sheet in Power BI, okay. And when I say import the Excel sheet, that means we are importing a data set into the Power BI, and then we make changes in the data set, we create we do a lot of things, right? And ultimately we create a dashboard. Now let's just say that if I have made certain changes to the source data file of Excel which is stored in my computer, let's say in my local system. So let's say I'm using Power BI and there is a file. Let's say I'm using the file which is stored in this local system that I have, right? So if I make the changes, will it reflect immediately in the Power BI? No, it will not. Unless and until we refresh the Power BI, it will not reflect. Okay, but the moment we refresh the Power BI, the whatever the changes we have made to the source Excel sheet, those will reflect in Power BI. That is the important thing. I hope import mode is clear to you. Okay. Uh, Speaking of the other options, we can talk about the direct query. What exactly happens in direct query? So second is direct query mode. What happens in direct query mode is basically Power BI is directly connected to the data source, and whenever the query is made, it doesn't import the data into its internal storage. Unlike Excel sheet, what was happening in Excel sheet? So if let's say there are tables in the Excel sheet, what will Power BI do? Power BI will store that data into its internal storage, but when it comes to direct query, that doesn't happen, right? The data stays in that source system. For instance, how do we understand this? Let us say that you are connected to the what do we call to SQL server, okay. And basically what happens is whenever you need the data, okay, you make a query, you pull the data. It does not mean the data is stored in the Power BI itself. So that's the basic difference between the import mode and the direct query mode. In import mode, what happens is data is stored, like Excel data we are storing into Power BI. When it comes to direct query, we are not storing the data into Power BI. We are just dynamically pulling the data as and when required, okay. So it is kind of a real-time data fetching. So again, the second difference, if you compare direct query and the import mode. In import mode, if any changes are made in the source system, let's say there are some changes in the Excel, it will not directly reflect in Power BI until we refresh in Power BI. But when it comes to direct query, the changes would be updated, okay. A refresh is not required. The third mode of connectivity is a live connection mode. Now this is something that we need to understand what exactly happens in this. So it is kind of a similar to direct query, but there is a certain difference, okay. This is specifically used for certain data sources like analysis services or Azure analysis services, okay. Again, in this case also the data is pulled on the in the real time itself, okay. but obviously you must be expecting that there must be some differences between the two. So let us understand the differences between these two connections as well. First and the foremost difference, as we understand that direct query supports multiple data sources from Azure, as I mentioned in this PPT as well, Azure SQL data source, BigQuery, Oracle, Teradata. So there are multiple sources which are supported for direct query. But when it comes to live connection mode, it does not support all, but it just supports the analysis services or Azure analysis services. So there are certain specific data, specific connection modes that are supported. Second difference is the data model flexibility. What really happens, see, when it comes to live connection mode, no, there is not much flexibility, to be honest. Okay, there are limitations, but when it comes to direct query, you will get more flexibility while creating the relationship between the two tables, while creating the measures, while creating the calculated columns. So that flexibility you will have when it comes to direct query. And the third important thing is that, see, specifically live connection mode is used when you are dealing with the huge data sets, and you want to perform the calculations, complex calculations. But that is not the case with direct query. I mean, obviously you can have the big data sets, but the performance is a factor that comes into picture when it comes to this. Okay, because then you may have to take some steps to ensure that you have the good performance. You may need to put some efforts to optimize the performance of the data when we are using the direct query.